A waitress shared her food with a homeless boy every day. One morning, 5 SUVs pulled up to her diner. Before we start, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you love emotional love stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way, besides not missing any amazing stories, you'll also help the channel grow and keep bringing more and more special content for you. Now let's get to today's story. The afternoon sun was spitting invisible flames over the streets of Savannah, making the air feel as heavy as a curtain of hot smoke. Sonny's diner, with its peeling pale blue wooden facade and its lazily blinking sign, looked like a small beacon of hope for those wandering under the weight of the heat and the hardships of life. Inside the diner, the strong aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the lingering smell of frying food and apple pie baking in the oven. Scratched formica tables, red vinyl seats cracked by time, and an old ceiling fan spinning lazily completed the cozy though time-worn scene. Emily Carter moved between the tables with the ease of someone who knew every inch of that creaky floor. Her slim and graceful figure contrasted with the simple uniform: a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, a navy blue apron tied around her waist, faded jeans, and worn-out sneakers. The golden blonde of her loose, wavy hair captured the diffuse light coming through the windows, while her deep, dreamy blue eyes absent-mindedly scanned the movement in the restaurant. That afternoon, while she cleared empty plates and handed out automatic smiles, something unusual caught her attention. Beyond the dusty window, a small, dirty, and skinny boy was watching everything with wide eyes. His faded cap almost hid his tangled light brown hair, and his clothes, far too big for his body, were so worn out that his knees peeked through holes in his jeans. Emily's heart gave a little leap. In him, there was a mix of hunger and fear that squeezed her chest like an invisible hand. Setting the tray down on the well-worn wooden counter, she looked at Frank, the grumpy, gray-haired cook, and said in an urgent whisper, "Frank, give me a few minutes. There's someone outside who needs help." He just grunted and nodded, continuing to flip burgers on the sizzling griddle. Emily pushed the creaky door open with her shoulder and felt the hot asphalt breath rise to meet her. She approached slowly, with a gentle smile on her face so as not to scare the boy. "Hi, my name is Emily," she said softly, kneeling down to be at eye level with him. Her voice carried the sweetness of someone who already knew the pain of abandonment. "You're hungry, aren't you?" The boy hesitated. His green eyes, so alive and yet so haunted at the same time, looked at her with distrust. After a tense moment, he gave a barely perceptible nod, a slight movement of his head. Looking at those thin hands clutching his own elbow as if trying to hide inside himself, Emily felt a surge of indignation against a world so cruel to the most fragile. She held out her hand, palm open, offering a piece of trust. "Come with me. We'll get you something to eat. I promise you'll be safe." The boy looked at her hand, as if it was something precious, rare, and finally, with extreme shyness, placed his small, dirty fingers over hers. It was such a simple gesture, and yet so full of meaning that Emily's eyes welled up. With tears, she quickly blinked away. Inside the diner, the chatter died down. Some customers looked on with disdain, others with pity, but Emily ignored them. She led the boy to a corner table, away from the most critical eyes, and pulled out a chair for him. "Wait here, okay? I'm going to get something special for you," she said, with a smile that tried to hide the silent outrage bubbling inside her. Within minutes, she brought back a steaming plate of golden waffles covered with a generous layer of melting butter, soft scrambled eggs, and crispy bacon slices. The boy's eyes widened as if he had never seen so much food all at once. As he devoured every piece with a mixture of desperation and gratitude, Emily sat across from him, resting her chin in her hands and watching in silence. She didn't want to scare him with too many questions, but her heart ached to know. Who was this boy? Where had he come from? And how could someone so small carry such a heavy sadness on his shoulders? Trying to start a conversation, she asked sweetly, "What's your name, sweetheart?" The boy stopped chewing, his fork suspended in the air. Fear once again filled his green eyes. He just shook his head, refusing to say a word. Emily smiled, this time with a touch of sadness. "That's okay. You don't have to say anything right now. I'm here, okay?" Thus began the silent ritual. Day after day, in the scorching heat or under the threat of summer rains, Emily would set aside part of her lunch for the boy. Sometimes it was a sandwich wrapped in foil. Other times, a piece of peach pie with a little note, "To make you smile today." The boy, even without telling her his name, started to smile shyly when he saw her. The way he adjusted his cap or kicked the stones on the ground while he waited gradually revealed that behind his mistrust there was hope. On lonely nights, while resting on the small faded couch in her apartment, Emily would stare at the ceiling and wonder, "Am I destined to take care of everyone except myself?" She longed, with a pain that ached in her chest, to find someone who would see her, who would hold her without her having to be strong all the time. She dreamed of a love that would rescue her from the silent loneliness that even the soft music from the radio couldn't fill. Little did she know that by feeding that sad-eyed boy, she was, unknowingly, also feeding the seed of destiny that would soon intertwine her life with someone who would change everything. The weeks passed like leaves carried by the relentless summer wind. Emily Carter, now accustomed to the routine of sharing her meal with the silent boy, felt more and more connected to that small life that had crossed her path without warning. The boy still hadn't told her his name, but Emily, tired of calling him just Angel or My Little One, decided to secretly name him Lucas. To her, that name carried something strong and hopeful, like a light that persists even through the darkest nights. One stuffy afternoon, after the busy hours had died down, Emily was cleaning tables, while Lucas sat in his usual corner, finishing his slice of peach pie. The golden light of the late day lazily poured through the windows, painting everything in orange tones. Emily, holding the dish towel in her hands, watched the boy, her heart tightening with questions that grew like weeds in her mind. Summoning a courage she didn't know she had, she approached and sat down in front of him, pretending to adjust her apron as she gathered her words. You don't talk much, do you?" she said with a smile, trying to mask her worry. "It's okay. Sometimes we just need time to trust." Lucas, eyes fixed on his plate, shrugged. His green eyes, so intense and mysterious, avoided hers as if afraid of being discovered. Emily took a deep breath and risked asking, "Do you have somewhere to go after this? Is someone waiting for you?" The little boy froze for an instant. The spoon in his hand trembled slightly. Then, without lifting his eyes, he answered, in a nearly inaudible whisper, I just stay around." Emily felt a knot form in her throat. The vague and painful answer said more than any detailed confession ever could. Something inside her, a mix of maternal instinct and raw compassion, screamed that there was so much more behind that resigned silence. That night, after closing the diner, Emily stayed sitting in the empty parking lot, her elbows resting on her knees, staring at the sky, painted in pink and purple. The distant sound of crickets and the faint hum of streetlights broke the thick silence of the sleeping city. The warm breeze stirred her blonde hair as she hugged her knees, lost in thought. The asphalt still radiated the day's heat, and she felt that strange warmth as if it were trying to comfort a loneliness that felt bigger than ever. "How can such a small boy carry so much weight on his shoulders?" she murmured to herself, letting a silent tear rolled down her face. Emily wanted to do more. She wanted to find a way to protect him, to give him something he clearly had never had: safety, love, belonging. But what could she do? Just a simple waitress with her tight paycheck and her own abandoned dreams. She wished for someone to share that burden, to dream alongside her, someone who would hold her hand at the end of a hard day and say, "You're not alone." As she stared at the fading sunset on the horizon, Emily squinted against the orange-red glow, as if searching for answers in the sky. "Is it too much to ask for someone to share life with?" she whispered into the warm wind, her voice getting lost in the vastness. Lucas appeared at the diner's door, clutching his crumpled cap in his hands, his head bowed. Emily smiled when she saw him, but before she could call out to him, something made her freeze. Next to the boy, parked on the deserted street, was a black car with dark windows that she had never seen before. The engine remained running, rumbling low like an animal lying in wait. Lucas quickly looked at the car, then at Emily, and for a second, his childlike face was overtaken by such intense fear that Emily felt her stomach twist. "Lucas," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Who's that over there?" The boy bit his lower lip hard, and before he could answer, the car door slowly opened, releasing a creaking sound that seemed to echo across the empty parking lot. Emily jumped to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest, as Lucas took 2 steps back, his eyes wide with terror. Something was very wrong, and she was about to discover that behind Lucas's silence, there was a truth much darker than she could have ever imagined. That night, marked by the mystery of the black car and the fear in Lucas's eyes, dragged on endlessly. Emily slept poorly, her dreams filled with hazy images of threats and farewells. When the alarm clock went off, the sky was still barely lit, painted in grey and orange. Emily got ready in silence, a heavy sense of foreboding pressing down on her chest, without explanation. Sonny's diner opened as usual. The smell of strong coffee filled the air as Emily, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows and her apron tied tightly around her waist, arranged the tables with automatic care, trying to push away the unease gnawing at her soul. The regulars, sweaty truckers, lonely retirees, and hurried mothers with children filled the small restaurant with the cozy murmur of every morning. The bell above the door chimed with each new customer, bringing with it the comforting familiarity that Emily held so dear. But then, when the clock, hanging above the counter, struck 9:30, the screech of tires braking hard tore through the heavy air. Emily froze in the middle of the dining room, the coffee pot clinking in her trembling hand. Outside, 5 black SUVs, polished to a blinding shine under the cruel sun, parked in a line, taking up almost the entire street in front of the diner. The doors opened in perfect sync, and men in dark suits, wearing sunglasses and severe expressions, stepped out of the vehicles, forming an imposing line. Inside the restaurant, a heavy silence fell, as if the very air had been sucked out. Every eye turned toward the door. Some coffee cups stopped halfway to mouths. A customer's fork dropped, clattering onto the plate. Emily felt her heart race. The dish towel slipped from her fingers, falling to the floor unnoticed. In the middle of that intimidating group, a different man emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying himself with firm posture, he seemed to belong to another world. A world of power and mystery. His skin was sun-kissed, his dark brown hair perfectly slicked back. The dark grey suit hugged his athletic frame as if it had been tailored directly onto him. But what caught Emily the most wasn't his imposing appearance. It was his eyes. Eyes of stormy blue, intense and intelligent, that seemed to see right through the walls of the diner and right through her. For one eternal instant, Emily's and the stranger's eyes locked. A strange heat shot through her veins, as if summer itself had invaded her chest. She felt her breath catch, her legs weakening under the weight of something she couldn't name. He walked toward the diner door with steady steps, his men discreetly spreading out around the building. When the door opened with the chime of the bell, it was as if time itself had split in two. Before and after that moment, the man entered, filling the small space with his overwhelming presence. Everyone shrank back in their seats, whispering among themselves. Emily stood frozen behind the counter, the apron wrinkled between her hands. The man removed his sunglasses with a slow motion, revealing even more the intensity of his gaze. Then, without hesitation, he walked directly to her. When he stopped in front of the counter, Emily felt like the ground could open beneath her at any moment. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and smooth, full of authority and mystery. "My name is Nate Whitmore." The sound of that name seemed to echo inside her, like distant thunder. "I'm looking for someone," he continued, his voice slicing through the heavy air like a silk blade. "A little boy. Brown hair, green eyes." Emily felt her stomach drop. Her instincts screamed that Lucas was in danger, but at the same time, something about this man, about the way he spoke, conveyed a confusing mix of protection and threat. Trying to sound calm, she replied, "I don't know who you're talking about, sir." Nate tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing a chess move. "I know you've seen him," he said, lowering his voice to something almost intimate. "He trusts you. And now, more than ever, he needs the right person by his side." Emily, confused and suspicious, clenched her hands over the counter until her knuckles turned white. "Who are you really? Why are you looking for him?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding in her chest like a war drum. Nate didn't answer immediately. He simply looked deep into her eyes, as if searching for something more valuable than information. Then, with surprising gentleness, he said, "Sometimes it's not what it seems, but if you trust me, you'll understand." The doorbell chimed again when one of the men outside whistled, calling Nate over for a quick conversation whispered in his ear. Nate nodded and, before leaving, gave Emily one last look, loaded with something she couldn't name, something that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in a very long time. As the sound of the SUV engines filled the street again, Emily stood there, stunned, her heart torn between curiosity, fear, and a strange, inexplicable hope. Because in that instant, even though she didn't know how, she felt her life had just changed forever, and she could hardly imagine what was coming was bigger, more dangerous, and more thrilling than anything she had ever dared to dream. The next few hours dragged on at Sunny's diner, with an invisible tension hanging in the air like heavy clouds before a storm. Emily served coffee automatically, without really seeing the faces of the customers. Her mind, however, couldn't drift away from Nate's stormy blue eyes, from the silent threat that seemed to have walked in with him that morning. When the clock struck noon, the SUVs returned, their dark shadows covering the street like an omen. Emily swallowed hard as she saw them park in front of the diner. This time, Nate got out of the car with determined steps, followed by the same men in suits. He didn't enter right away. He stood on the sidewalk, as if hesitating, looking through the window directly at her. Emily, feeling her heart race, forced herself to walk toward the door. Before she could reach it, Nate opened it for her, the old wood creaking under the weight of the tension. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice so low and heavy it seemed to make the walls of the little restaurant tremble. She looked back, seeing some curious customers, pretending not to pay attention, but clearly watching every move. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. Nate guided her to the narrow alley beside the diner, where the smell of hot grass and gasoline hung in the air. There, away from prying eyes, he turned to face her. His expression was so serious it made Emily want to step back, and yet something inside her held firm. "We're not here to hurt anyone," Nate began, reading the fear in her eyes. "On the contrary, we're here to save him." Emily crossed her arms, the sunlight turning her golden hair into a fiery halo. "Save who? Lucas?" "From what?" Nate exchanged a quick look with one of the men with him, then turned his attention back to Emily. "Lucas isn't just an abandoned boy. He's Lucas Whitmore, heir to the Whitmore family, who tragically disappeared years ago under still unexplained circumstances." Emily blinked, trying to process those words as if they were in another language. "Whitmore?" she repeated, almost voiceless. "Yes," Nate replied, stepping forward. "He's the last surviving member, and someone, we don't know who yet, tried to hide him, to protect him, or to use him. We were hired to find him and make sure he's safe." Emily's head spun. All the times she had seen Lucas sleeping, curled up under the gas station canopy, or quietly sharing her food flashed before her eyes. He never talked about it," she whispered. "He never asked for anything. He never trusted anyone. But he trusted you," said Nate, his voice filled with something that sounded like a mix of admiration and pain. Emily felt tears burn behind her eyes. The world seemed to spin out of control. Lucas, that little being she tried so hard to protect, was part of something much bigger, more complicated, and now maybe about to be taken away from her. "He's just a child," she said, her voice trembling. "He doesn't need mansions and money. He needs love, someone who truly cares about him." Nate seemed to flinch at her confession. Something cracked in his gaze, as if he were struggling against his own orders. "I know," he murmured with devastating honesty, "and that's why I'm torn. Because the mission is clear, but my heart can't ignore what I see between you two." For a moment, it was just the two of them, wrapped in the suffocating heat of the afternoon, their hearts exposed like open wounds. Emily saw, for the first time, the man behind the suit and the impenetrable facade, someone as lost as she was. Before she could respond, one of the investigators approached hurriedly. "Nate," he called, his voice urgent, "we found something." Nate hesitated, struggling between duty and desire. Then, with an expression full of silent promises, he said to Emily, "I'll be back, and I'll make sure he stays safe, no matter what it takes." Emily watched him disappear among the cars and men, her chest tight with a new kind of fear, not just of losing Lucas, but of losing something she had not even had the chance to build with Nate. Inside her, a certainty grew like a flame. Nothing would ever be the same again, and what she would soon discover could shake even more of the little she still had standing. The suffocating heat of that afternoon seemed to have been replaced by a cold wind of sadness, as Emily, still wearing her crumpled diner apron, watched Lucas being carefully placed into one of the black SUVs. There was no chance for a last hug, no goodbye. Only the sharp sound of the door closing and the roar of the engine as the cars disappeared down the street, taking with them a small piece of her heart. "Lucas!" she cried out, without thinking, running down the cracked sidewalk, her eyes filled with tears and her chest burning. But he could no longer hear her. Some neighbors watched the scene from a distance, whispering among themselves. In the days that followed, the sharp tongues of little Savannah showed no mercy. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. They said Emily had known who Lucas was from the beginning, that she had approached the boy on purpose, trying to win some kind of reward, or maybe even a piece of the Whitmore fortune. "I heard she planned it all," a woman murmured while standing in line at the grocery store. "Do you think a random waitress would care about a street kid if she didn't have something to gain?" Another replied, shaking her head with disdain. Emily heard the whispers wherever she went. Each word felt like a knife sinking even deeper into her already shattered soul. She could barely leave the house, her steps heavy and aimless. The nights were long, and the silence screamed around her, echoing the words left unsaid, the hugs never given. On one of those nights, when the town seemed steeped in shadows and loneliness, Emily was sitting on the kitchen floor, hugging her knees, when a soft knock at the door broke the emptiness. Her heart raced. Maybe it was just another curious neighbor, or worse, someone coming to accuse her face to face. With trembling hands, she walked to the door and opened it slightly. On the other side, under the faint glow of the street lamp, stood Nate Whitmore. His blue eyes, as intense as the sky before a storm, searched for her with silent urgency. He wore dark jeans and a worn leather jacket. Looking nothing like the polished man she had met before, there he seemed real, human, hurt. "Emily," he said, his voice rough, as if carrying days of guilt. "Can I come in?" She hesitated, looking at him as if she no longer knew who to trust. But there was something in his expression, a mixture of regret and something deeper, something she so badly wanted to believe was real, that made her open the door a little wider. Nate entered slowly, respecting her space. The smell of the coming rain and damp earth mingled with the lingering scent of the house. "I needed to see you," he continued, running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture. "I heard what they're saying. I know it's not true." Emily crossed her arms, trying to keep a barrier between them. But it was hard when the pain in his eyes mirrored her own so clearly. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice coming out more bitter than she intended. He took a step closer, stopping just a few inches from her. "Because from the moment I saw you, something in me changed," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You weren't trying to gain anything. You gave him what no one else gave, love, without asking for anything in return. And that's rarer than any fortune." The silence that fell between them was heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. Emily felt the tears welling up again, but this time not from pain, from relief. There was at least one person who saw who she really was. Nate extended his hand, hesitant, as if offering her a new beginning. "Let me try to fix this," he pleaded. Emily looked at that hand, at those eyes that seemed to beg for forgiveness, and felt something break inside her, a wall of fear and distrust she had been building for a long time. Without saying a word, she placed her hand in his, and on that silent night, under the weight of so many burdens, a small spark of hope began to shine again. But as Emily would soon discover, the road to redemption would be far more tortuous than either of them could imagine. The following days were cruel. The news that Emily had been fired from the diner spread as quickly as the malicious rumors. No manager wanted to associate their name with hers. On the streets of Savannah, where every corner seemed to have sharp eyes and mouths, she was seen as an opportunist. With her head down and shoulders slumped, Emily walked along the wet sidewalk, her small rolling suitcase dragging behind her. The rain had begun to fall, thin and cold, mixing with the tears she refused to let flow in public. It was then that Nate appeared out of nowhere, standing under the shelter of a closed coffee shop's porch, holding a black umbrella. His blue eyes, so intense and concerned, locked onto her as if he could feel every fragment of the pain she carried. "Come here," he said, opening the umbrella and extending his hand. Emily hesitated, but in the end, exhaustion outweighed pride. She approached him, and together they walked silently to Nate's car, which was parked a few yards away. The sound of the rain drumming against the roof of the vehicle seemed to calm Emily's frayed nerves. Inside the car, Nate turned on the heater. The warm air enveloped them, and for a moment, there was only the comfortable sound of their breathing. "I couldn't just stand by," he finally said, looking at her with disarming sincerity. "I know you didn't do anything wrong, and I'm going to prove it." Emily stared at him, suspicious, but something inside her, maybe that thin thread of hope that had never completely broken, urged her to trust him. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care?" Nate ran his hand through his wet hair, taking a deep breath before answering. "Because from the first moment I saw you, you shook my world," he said, his voice low and heavy with emotion. "You had no idea, but in that instant, in the middle of an ordinary morning, you became the most real thing I had seen in a very long time." Emily felt her heart tighten, as if all the barriers she had carefully built over her life were beginning to crumble before those words. "I'm just a waitress," she murmured, looking away. "No," Nate corrected, moving closer. "You're the woman who had the courage to care for someone when no one else would even look at him. The woman who kept her kindness even when life tried to crush her." Silence fell again, dense and intimate. Emily felt his hand brush against hers, hesitant, asking for permission, and this time she did not pull away. Guided by a force neither of them could control, their faces drew closer, and there, under the rain that washed the world outside, they shared a timid kiss full of unspoken promises. When they pulled apart, both smiled almost shyly, as if they had crossed a line from which there was no return. "We'll find the truth," Nate promised, his forehead resting against hers. "Together." And so, on that stormy night, between fear and hope, a bond was born, stronger than doubt, more powerful than any lie. But what they still did not know was that the truth they were seeking had roots far deeper and more dangerous than they could ever imagine. In the days that followed, Emily and Nate became shadows of each other. The need to find answers about the Whitmore family's past kept them side by side, but quietly, something else grew between them, a subtle and deep connection that neither dared to name yet. Each uncovered clue revealed disturbing fragments. Former employees of the Whitmore mansion spoke in whispers of internal rivalries, suspicious disappearances, and inheritances tainted with secrets. It was like opening a Pandora's box that should have remained sealed. On a sweltering afternoon, while digging through old documents in the damp basement of the city library, Emily dropped an old photo album. When she bent down to pick it up, her hand brushed against Nate's. The touch was brief but incendiary. Emily pulled back quickly, her face flushing. "Sorry," she murmured, looking away. Nate smiled almost imperceptibly, his deep, calm voice filling the space between them. "You don't have to apologize for existing, Emily." Her heart pounded so hard, it felt like the echoes could be heard throughout the dark basement. She hugged the album tightly to her chest, fighting against the almost irresistible urge to surrender to the feeling that was growing, challenging every barrier she had ever built. That night, as they left the library, the full moon lit up the empty square of Savannah. The warm wind blew through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and the approaching summer. Emily walked a few steps ahead, trying to ignore the absurd desire to entwine her hand with his. Suddenly, Nate called her softly. "Emily." She stopped, turning to face him. Her heart tightened even more at the vulnerable expression on his face, so different from the confident man everyone else saw. "I know I come from a different world than yours," he said, approaching slowly, as if he feared scaring her. "But I also know that what I feel for you is the only thing right now that I am absolutely sure of." Emily swallowed hard, her whole body trembling between fear and hope. "Nate, she began, but the words were lost in the emotion. He touched her face with the tips of his fingers, as if she were made of glass, and finished, I do not expect you to trust me right now. I just want you to know that I am here, that I choose you, Emily Carter, even without easy promises, even without guarantees." The tears she had held back for so long finally escaped, rolling silently down her face. But this time, it was not sadness. It was something sweeter, more dangerous. It was the beginning of true love. With a small smile, Emily whispered, her voice trembling, "I am scared, but I think I am tired of running." Nate simply pulled her into his arms, hugging her tightly, as if he could shield her from the weight of the world. At that moment, under the witnessing moon, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe she did deserve to be loved. But the Whitmore past still held dangers that threatened to destroy everything they were beginning to build. And soon, very soon, the shadow of what had been done would come to claim its price. The discovery came like lightning in a clear sky. Among forgotten documents, hidden letters, and muffled reports, Emily and Nate began to piece together the terrible puzzle. Harrison Whitmore, the seemingly benevolent patriarch, had been the dark architect of the entire tragedy. It had been he who planned Lucas's disappearance to maintain control of the family fortune, manipulating everything and everyone in the name of his sick ambition. It was nighttime when this cruel truth fully revealed itself. The sky over Savannah was heavy with dark clouds, promising a storm. Emily and Nate, gathered in the small makeshift office in her house, felt the weight of the imminent danger. Every shadow seemed denser, every street noise more threatening. Emily slammed the last drawer shut, her face pale with shock and outrage. "He is not just cruel, Nate," she whispered, her voice choked. "He is a monster." Nate, standing by the window, kept watch on the street with alert eyes. His firm jaw revealed the tension he was barely controlling. "I should have never doubted it," he said bitterly, full of guilt. "I always thought there was something rotten, but I never imagined it was this deep." Emily sat on the edge of the chair, hugging herself as if trying to protect herself from the weight of that revelation. Her blue eyes, always so lively, were now clouded with fear and revolt. "He could destroy us, Nate. He could destroy Lucas," she said, almost in a broken whisper. It was then that Nate approached. His steady, determined steps seemed to promise something that no words could guarantee. He knelt before her, taking her cold hands into his. "Emily," he began, his voice low, filled with raw emotion. "No matter what happens from now on, I will protect you. I will protect Lucas, no matter what it costs." Emily felt the tears threaten again, but this time it was different. It was not pain that provoked them. It was the strength of true love, born in the midst of chaos. Before she could respond, Nate gently pulled her toward him. And there, in that instant, when everything seemed to be crumbling around them, their lips met. The kiss was urgent, carrying all the pent-up tension, but at the same time tender, as if promising that even in the darkness, there was light, and that light was them together. When they separated, Nate's eyes were locked onto hers, an unshakable determination shining in them. "We are in this together, Emily," he murmured, "until the end." Outside, the first thunder cracked across the sky, announcing the coming storm. But Emily did not feel fear. For the first time in a long while, she knew she was no longer alone. The danger, however, was getting closer and closer, and Harrison Whitmore was not a man who accepted defeat. Harrison Whitmore's arrest crashed over Savannah like a thunderclap, echoing through every corner of the small town. It did not take long for the news to spread. The powerful patriarch, who for years had ruled over everyone with his influence, was now exposed as the true villain of the story. Justice at last was beginning to prevail. That golden afternoon, under the soft warmth of summer, the old diner where everything had started was packed. Friends, neighbors, and even former critics gathered, filled with curiosity and remorse. Emily, wearing a simple blue dress that highlighted the lightness of her eyes, stood behind the counter, her heart racing with nerves and hope. The door opened with the chime of the old bell. For a moment, the chatter ceased. There stood Lucas, now clean, well-dressed, but with the same sweet, shy look as always. Beside him, Nate Whitmore, imposing and serene, walked toward her. Emily felt her legs weaken. Lucas's smile bloomed like a flower in winter, and he ran toward her. Without thinking, Emily knelt down and wrapped him in a tight embrace, letting the tears flow freely down her face. "I knew you would come back to me," she whispered between sobs. Lucas clung to her, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I never wanted to leave, Emily." A murmur of emotion filled the diner, but before Emily could compose herself, Nate stepped forward, his blue eyes, as intense as the ocean, locked onto hers. The room seemed to disappear around them. Nate climbed onto one of the chairs, calling everyone's attention. With quiet confidence, he took Emily's hand in front of the stunned crowd. "I have learned many things on this journey," he said, his voice echoing firmly. "I have seen how power and money can corrupt. I have seen how greed can destroy a family." He took a deep breath, his gaze softening as he looked at Emily as if she were his only anchor in the world. "But it was here, in this diner, in front of a woman with a pure heart, that I found something I could never buy or inherit. Emily Carter, you gave me the most precious gift anyone could ever receive, the chance to truly love." An emotional silence filled the room. Emily felt her chest swell with emotion, her eyes brimming with the sincerity of that moment. Nate stepped down from the chair and, with a tender smile, knelt before her, still holding her hand. "I have no titles to offer you, no empty promises. I only have myself, and a love that is yours, if you still want it." Time seemed to stop. Emily looked at Lucas, who smiled hopefully, and then at the crowd, who waited anxiously for her answer. But deep down, she already knew. She had always known. With a trembling smile on her lips, she leaned forward and murmured, "I love you too, Nate Whitmore." The explosion of applause and cheers filled the air like music. Nate rose and, in a decisive move, enveloped Emily in a passionate kiss, sealing not just a love story, but a new life built on courage, truth, and redemption. As they kissed, under the golden afternoon light, Lucas, laughing, jumped around them, as if the world had finally become a safe place again. But not everything had been resolved yet, and destiny had one last lesson in store for all of them. The sunset bathed Savannah in gold, as if the sky itself was blessing this new beginning. On the old vacant lot, now completely transformed, a simple wooden sign swung gently in the wind. Hope's Corner. It was more than a restaurant. It was a home, a refuge for young people who, like Lucas once was, had been forgotten by the world. Emily, with the serene smile of someone who knows pain and overcoming, walked among the carefully arranged tables, checking the final details for the grand opening. Her hair was tied back in a simple braid, and a light dress flowed around her like a summer hug. Nate, beside her, wore dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up over strong arms that still bore the marks of the battle they had fought together. He held a task list in his hands, but his eyes were fixed on Emily, as if everything else no longer mattered. "Do you think they'll like it, Emily?" Nate asked, his voice filled with a tenderness that grew stronger each day. She looked around, seeing the young people arranging the chairs, laughing shyly, wearing uniforms with the discreet Hope's Corner logo on their chests. Each one was a story, starting anew. Each smile, a scar healing. "I don't think, Nate," she replied, holding his hand firmly. "I am sure." He smiled, and in that smile, Emily saw all the future she had always dreamed of. Even on the loneliest nights, when everything seemed lost. On the day of the opening, the whole town showed up. Men with worn hats, women in their Sunday dresses, children running around the tables. Savannah, which had once judged her harshly, now gave her a standing ovation. Lucas was the first to step onto the small, improvised stage. He wore a blue shirt and new jeans, his hair carefully combed, and he held the microphone with trembling hands. "I just wanted to say," he began, his voice breaking, "that if it weren't for Emily, I wouldn't be here today. She believed in me when no one else did. She showed me that I was more than the mistakes of my past." Emily cried silently, feeling her heart expand until it hurt. Nate, with his protective arm around her shoulders, whispered in her ear, "You changed his life, and mine too." Then, in front of the whole town, Nate knelt down again, pulling from his pocket a small blue velvet box. Emily brought her hand to her mouth, surprised and emotional. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice firm and emotional, "I want to spend the rest of my life reminding you how much your kindness saved this world, starting with me. Will you marry me?" The diner erupted in applause and tears. Emily knelt down beside him, her eyes shining, and answered with a trembling voice, "Yes, Nate, forever yes." With a sweet, lingering kiss, they sealed not just a promise of love, but a promise never to give up on those who need a second chance. As the music played and the lights twinkled over Hope's Corner, Emily understood with her whole soul the lesson life had taught her. True love blooms where there is courage to be kind, even when everything seems lost. And in that once-forgotten corner of the world, in the place where hope was reborn, Emily and Nate built not just a home, but a legacy that would last forever. So what did you think of this story? I would love to hear your opinion. Leave a comment with a score from 0 to 10, telling how much it moved you. Don't forget to like if you enjoyed it, share it with someone you think will fall in love with this story, and subscribe to the channel to follow more amazing stories. Before you go, I have selected another moving story that will touch your heart even more. I am sure you won't want to miss it. See you there.